Welcome to our webinar for today. It is May 1st, 2020, and I am so pleased to be with you all. If nothing else, it's a break for an hour from all that's going on around us, but it's a really nice chance to do some self-care through learning. And I am so lucky that today's presentation is given by two of the folks that I get to work with every day. Kate Gibson, who is a board certified psychologist with us, and Caroline Harvey, psychologist on our team as well. They have developed a passion for this work. Many of you know that PCIT was intended originally for kids 2 to 7. We have downward modifications with the toddler protocol. And what is it we do with the older kids? Cheryl McNeil wrote the first chapter that many of us refer to in the original handbook, textbook on PCIT. And Kate and Caroline have done a great job developing this and making it more user-friendly for us to use. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to my friends and colleagues, Kate and Caroline.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for the lovely introduction, Steve. So why don't we move on and dive in and get started. We've got Cheryl with us. We have nothing to disclose in terms of any commercial funding or benefit. We're just here because we love clinically to work with PCIT and adapt it up for kids a little older. So we're here to share what we've been doing with you. Okay. So hopefully at the end of our conversation today, you're able to talk about the rationale for the changes that we're using, think about what cases might be a good fit as well, understand the mastery criteria and the differences in CDI and PDI from standard PCIT to the approach that we're going to talk about today, as well as think about, we're adding in terms of PDI, what we're doing by internet right now with a lot of our families may need to change. And so how can this approach inform some of that also? Okay, so why change a good thing? We have this great PCIT approach where we've got the timeout room, we've got the timeout chair, we've got coaching, we've got coding, we've got CDI, we've got PDI. It's so wonderful. We all love it. We all drank the Kool-Aid already. Why do we need to change some things? Well, as we all know, there comes a point where kids stop being as engaged in the same type of play. They stop, they're more able to kind of undermine some of the things that we set up for discipline. So as they get older, we need to change some of the way that we deliver, how we're using behavioral strategies, but we still want to try to keep as much of the great thing that is PCIT present and in place, because we do love it and know so much of it works so well. So we just want to think about how do we tweak it to fit kids who are just a little bit older also. So in terms of research, not a ton has been done to really systematically and large scale look at how we would adapt PCIT for children who are just a bit older. So studies have been done that cover children up to about age 12. This is one of the most well-known studies that does include kids up to age 12, but this study is actually really best known for the trauma relevance and the fact that PCIT showed reduced rates of abuse reports in the future. And it happened to be that kids up to age 12 were included in this study. And what ended up happening was that some of the discipline strategies used varied because of the kids being older, even though that wasn't necessarily a focus of this study. So there was another study that was a SAMHSA funded research study that was multi-site and included children up to age 11. And in that study, they did some modifications to PDI as well. And that seems to be where a lot of changes have happened in the research that has been done with kids getting up to a little older, is making some PDI changes, sometimes CDI as well, but more so in the PDI area. So looking at privilege loss or different token economies or response cost systems to help tweak PDI for those older kids. There are also a few case studies that have been done. This case study looked at an 11-year-old, and they didn't make many modifications to CDI, and they used swoop and go instead of carrying to the timeout chair as a PDI modification. There are a couple other case studies too. If you just advance to the next one, the next two case studies are approaches that ended up using the adaptation that we're going to talk about today, which comes from chapter 10 in the Parent-Child Interaction Therapy book, this one that we know and love, on older children. So this case study was with an 8-year-old and actually started out with standard CDI. And when challenges presented in using standard CDI, they went to chapter 10 from this book and decided to use this adaptation in the middle of CDI and then going into PDI. And there was an additional case study out of Germany that used chapter 10 as well. That was one of those CDI cures where they did a little bit of PDI as preventive, but felt like they really got the progress they were looking for from CDI alone. So there are little pieces of things that we've been able to collect through the research, but nothing large scale has been done yet. So Peer et al. Out of Idaho have an approach they're calling PCIT for middle childhood, that they did a pilot study with 4 children that showed promising results. And again, for a big part of the changes were in PDI, where they incorporated a token economy and a response cost system. So that's kind of what we know right now from the literature. And the themes that come from the studies that have been done and the experiences people have had implementing PCIT with kids a bit older are that the activities that we usually use in traditional PCIT are less likely to engage kids that are a little bit older, that 5-minute length just isn't enough. So these are themes from all of those different studies, as well as just some clinical experience. The kids, once they get to about 7 or 8, they don't tolerate that same intense level of pride skills as well. So we want to think about all of these things when we're thinking about the rationale for the changes that we're going to make if we're adapting PCIT for kids a bit older. So frequent commands can be frustrating and irritating in a different way developmentally for kids in this age group. And the play commands that are just really contrived, they feel kind of insulting in a way because they're sort of developmentally beneath where these kids are. So we're trying to think about how do we adjust what we're going to do with our commands too. So we also have bigger kids where getting them from doing the whole room chair, that's a whole different physical experience when your kid is 8, 9, 10 years old than when they're 3, 4, 5 years old. And it can be a lot more engaging once we have bigger kids on our hands, engaging and reinforcing for the child to have that physical back and forth. And another theme that came up was just kids sort of, as they're getting older and wanting to have more of a voice in the process, feeling as if the therapist and the parents were kind of allied against them if we were doing a standard approach, a standard PCIT approach. Okay, so the adaptation that we have been using is based again on the McNeil and Hembry-Keegan chapter 10 on older children in the Parent-Child Interaction Therapy book. And the important things to think about with this chapter, we're still using CDI. It's still the foundation of shaping the child's behavior, improving the parent-child relationship, but we're going to reduce the frequency of pride skills so that it's more developmentally appropriate and allows for more back and forth. The overall rate of parent talking, again, we want it to feel more conversational and developmentally on target for these kids.
If I may, to clarify, reduce the number of pride skills needed to be considered mastery.
Yeah, and we'll get to the exact detail on that, but yes, exactly, Steve. So we want more back and forth in the conversation. It's not just such a sole focus on the child and their behavior. And in PDI, we're going to try to introduce PDI more gradually so that it's better tolerated by the kiddos in this age group. Okay, so when we are thinking about what kids are good for this approach. We're thinking approximately age 7 to 10. So some programs, depending on funding, for standard PCIT, if you're doing research, have a hard stop at age 7. And so you might not be able to continue standard PCIT for a kiddo once they've turned 7. If you're in a private practice or a clinic, you might have more flexibility. But it's about age 7 that we see that kids start to kind of outgrow that standard PCIT. And so we're talking about using this approach from about then until about 10, 11, depending on developmental level. So it's this sort of older elementary age that we're talking about. We can still use live coaching and so much of the things that we really love PCIT for, but we can make just some adjustments to help it be more successful. We're still going to do the same assessment process we would normally do. We're going to need a parent intake. We're going to need ECBs and whatever assessments we normally do. We're going to need that DPICS to get a sense of where we're starting from, what parent skills are, what the parent-child relationship looks like. So we're going to be starting off pretty much the same, just with kids a little bit older. So then when we get into CDI, there's going to be a lot that's the same, and there's going to be some things that are slightly different. So coding and coaching, just like in standard PCIT, are going to be the heart of CDI. We want that coding to guide our session, and we want coaching to help shape the child behavior, the parent behavior, the relationship. It's the heart and soul of PCIT. We still need them practicing these skills, giving that daily therapy dose at home every day. And we still need them using pride skills. Pride skills are still essential, integral, and important. And we still want them stepping away from those questions, commands, and criticisms to allow for that different dynamic in their interaction. But there are some important differences that we're going to make when we're adjusting PCIT for children 7 to 10. So I'm going to go into each of these in a little more detail. So in terms of the length of special time, 5 minutes is just too short for kids this age. So we are adapting it to be 10 minutes long. It allows the interaction to feel more authentic and not too prematurely terminated or interrupted. So the types of toys also are going to take a little longer to make progress on and get done with. There might be a lot more project-based or craft type things. So you can see that the types of toys, we kind of are broken up into different categories. So there are a lot of options in terms of art supplies and a lot of different, still we want to do non-rule-based creative types of activities that really allow for interaction back and forth and don't have a set way that they need to be done until PDI. And in PDI, sometimes we do introduce activities that have to be done in a stepwise manner because it just lends itself nicely to relevant real life commands that relate to the activity. But in CDI, we definitely want it to be very creative. Lots of construction toys that are just a little more advanced than we would use for the typical age. And some of these things are things that you might pick up each time and add on to and aren't necessarily starting from scratch each special time. So it could be ongoing projects that get put to the side that you come back to that really keep kids engaged in working on something long-term as well. So special time is going to be longer, your toys are going to be slightly different, and the session structure is going to be slightly different. So we still want to have a check-in with parents, but we're also going to add in a check-in with children. So the order of this is less important. So let's say in your, wherever you practice, that parents are coming in and filling out their homework sheets and ECBs first thing when they get there. That could be a great opportunity to do the child check-in while the parents are completing their paperwork so that you're just using your time really efficiently. But we're going to have a check-in both with the parents and with the child. So we want the child to feel like they're a member of this team. We want them to be invested in making this work and to really be feeling that their voice is heard and their vantage point is appreciated. And the child check-in allows us to do that. So we check in with how they feel special time is going. We check in with how things are at home in general, anything they want to share with us. I had a kiddo for whom, when I was explaining the child check-in and that we would have a chance to talk about how special time is going, he also added in, oh, and that would probably be a great time for me to talk about the things that have been making me angry lately too. And it was great. Like, he was excited and he just loved having that space. And kids in this age group, they have more to say about what's going on at home, and creating that space for them to do it really helps this approach be successful. So after we've checked in with that kiddo, we've checked in with the parents, we're still going to do our standard 5 minutes of coding per parent, and we're going to coach each parent, and we're going to have that time to debrief the session, tell them what to work on at home. And a lot of it's going to look very similar to a standard PCIT session. An important thing for the parent check-in piece is that we still want parents to really master the pride skills. And I'm going to get into mastery criteria in a little bit, but because they're going to be using less frequent pride skills during the coaching with their child in the parent check-in, sometimes we'll role play with them to get their pride skills up to that standard 10, 10, and 10 mastery level without the child there, so that they're just getting that over learning piece with us as the clinician in a role play practice, knowing that they're going to be using them a little less frequently when they're in the room with their own kiddo. Okay, so here's the meat of it, the pride skill adaptations. So the pride skills are still all there. They're still the same. The don'ts are still the same. We're still trying to keep parents away from questions, commands, criticism. We still want them using pride skills. But when it comes to praise, we really want them to be varying their praise. Developmentally, kids respond better at this age when it's unlabeled praise, labeled praise, and nonverbal praise. So they're going to mix that all up together, and nonverbal meaning like a fist bump, a thumbs up, high five, or just excitement. We want that physical nonverbal praise woven in as well, so that the interaction just feels authentic to the child. When it comes to reflections, rather than focusing on repeating the words exactly, we really want parents focused on summarizing and paraphrasing what their kids are saying, so that, again, we're staying developmentally where these kiddos are. When they're imitating, there's a lot of crafts that we're doing with these kids. So it might mean you're both working on filling in paint in a color form, but parent is doing a rainbow color form and child is doing a flower color form, and you're not trying to do the exact same thing, but you're trying to both be engaged in the same activity. When it comes to descriptions, there are two kinds of descriptions in this adaptation for older kids. So there's our standard behavior description that we still want parents doing, and there's an information description that we're adding in and coding for as well. So if you go to the next one here, what is an information description anyway? So the definition is that it's a parent commenting on their own activity in the play, or sharing their thoughts and feelings related to the play activity or something happening in the room in the parent-child interaction. So these examples are taken straight out of chapter 10. And this is an example of how it would flow conversationally too. So parent and child are playing. You're sorting the Legos into piles. I'll help you look for yellow ones. You put the big blue ones over here. The blue ones are my favorite. Oh, you're putting all the heads together. I think I might need one of those heads in a minute. It's just conversational. And if the parent is in the play focused on what they're doing together, when the parent's talking about their own thoughts, reactions, or actions, that's going to be an information description. And if they're kind of alternating like this between behavior descriptions and information descriptions, it's going to have a really nice flow for the children in their experience of their parents' attention and positive attention during CDI. Okay, so I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure I'm talking a little fast because there's a lot to cover in PDI and I want to make sure we have ample time. But in terms of mastery, here is what we're looking for. for praise, so for all of the pride skills, we're lowering from 10 to 7. We're expecting less frequent talk overall and less frequent pride skills. So 7 rather than 10 is going to be the mastery criteria. So within that, there are a couple important points. So within praise, we want at least 4 of the praises to be labeled, and the rest can be unlabeled praises, whatever it takes to get to 7 or higher. And when it comes to descriptions, we want at least 4 of the descriptions to be our standard behavior descriptions. So that is an important subpoint in terms of mastery. It's 7 praise, 7 reflection, 7 descriptions, with at least 4 of the praise being labeled and with at least 4 of the descriptions being standard behavior descriptions. And same thing for the don'ts as in standard PCIT, ideally 0, but 3 or less questions, commands, and criticism. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Caroline to take over and talk about PDI.
Thanks, Kate. Great. So moving right along, for the sake of time, let's dive into how PDI looks in the older child protocol. So there's a lot that is the same, similar to CDI. We do have PDI coding, and we are reaching towards PDI mastery in the way that we would with standard PCIT. We're giving the same guidelines in terms of effective commands, the same rules to make sure that these commands are specific and at the child's developmental level, explanations before commands. You guys know the deal with that. We're still going to cover house rules if they're needed, as well as public behavior. In terms of what is different, we are breaking PDI up into 3 different modules. And the goal of this is to shape compliance and implement the timeout more gradually so that the child is better able to accept the timeout procedure. So we're going to start with command training, moving on to timeout with incentive chart, and ending with timeout with suspension of privileges once parents have been able to master the prior 2. We're going to have 2 teaching sessions to go over command training as well as the incentive chart. So we're going to have 2 parent-only teaches in PDI. Our timeout procedure is shifted to being hands-off, but we're still going to have that solo time with that child, the individual check-in with the therapist and child. So let's dive in. What is command training? So as I said before, we're going to start with a teach session, and this is where we're reviewing all the effective guidelines for effective commands. What we're going to do is encourage parents to include more complex commands because older children can handle it. We still prefer to keep commands single step, but we can include more commands like please put all of the crayons away instead of maybe starting with the yellow ones or a small pile. We're also going to be teaching the big ignore sequence in this teach, which I'll go over in a moment. And what's different from the PDI teach and standard PCIT is that we are encouraging parents to begin implementing this new PDI sequence at home right away after the teach. So we are encouraging them to really practice those effective commands even before they come in and get some coaching. And really, when it comes to these commands, we want to emphasize that we're giving respectful commands, emphasizing that tone of voice as we would with standard PCIT, and just noting that to best prepare them for following directions in the classroom, this is what's going to help them get there. When it comes to the coaching session, we are doing at least 1 CT coach session with the family. We can do more than 1 if the family needs additional practice, if we're finding that they need additional time to master these skills or to see the positive impact of them, but we minimally want to keep it at 1. And what we're going to do is in PDI, we're going to shift from parent check-ins to joint check-ins with the entire family, with the parent and the child, so that the child, again, feels like they're part of the team, especially as we transition over to PDI, but still continuing to have that individual time with the child following the parent check-in to maintain rapport and to introduce to them the new PDI sequence and strategies that we're going to be using. And during these coaching sessions, we are going to shift the activities to include more of those ordered step activities that Kate was speaking of, or school-related activities, so that we can give commands related to maybe a Lego set or some other hobby set that they're putting together for academics. Okay, so in the child check-in, some things to keep in mind. We're going to be explaining the command training sequence in this first coaching session to the child. And what we're going to emphasize to them is we're working on listening skills and following directions better, but parents are going to be working on learning nice, respectful ways to give directions and to help them practice noticing and appreciating when the child listens. Okay, so let's move on over to what the sequence looks like. So we're always going to start with a direct command. So the example here, please build the base level first. So this would be maybe with a step-by-step Lego set that we were speaking of. Same warning, if you don't insert command, I will turn and ignore. So in this situation, the consequence is a big ignore. If they listen, we're going to give that same genuine praise. You're such a great listener. We do accept unlabeled praise with the PDI sequences here, again, because that's the children are older and they're able to make that connection, although we still want to get a high rate of labeled praise in there as well. If they don't comply, we're going to turn away and do one big active ignore for 45 seconds. And then they're just going to continue to the task. So one thing to keep in mind with command training is that we're not exactly targeting compliance here. That ultimately is the goal, but we're breaking it down into these smaller steps so that the child can better accept it. And a lot of parents might say, well, if we're just ignoring the fact that they didn't listen, they're not learning. And what we just encourage is we're going to get there. This is the first step in preparing them so that when we do get to the consequence targeting compliance, they'll be better able to accept it. And when we're in command training, we're making sure that we're giving logical commands pertaining to the activity rather than those arbitrary play commands. Again, because these older children kind of get offended by it. They find it insulting when you give those play commands. And just like our standard PCIT, we're going to debrief with the child and parent at the end of the session, treating them like a team who's working together to solve their problems. Okay, so after we get at least one of those command training coach sessions, we're ready to move on to the second phase, timeout with incentive chart. So this is when we introduce a hands-off timeout procedure, and this is going to replace the big ignore for non-compliance. What we do is we introduce a reward chart to help motivate the child to comply with timeout. They're going to receive a sticker or a star or a smiley face, whatever the parent and child decide, for each day in which they either receive 0 timeouts or cooperate with every timeout that they're being given. So going to and staying in the chair. And we tell parents that they can break up weekend days or even weekdays, especially now during quarantine, we might encourage this, where they can break each day up into the morning and evening so that they have opportunities to earn stickers in the morning or in the second half of their day. And then they can receive small daily rewards, such as a little treat or bonus screen time, as well as larger weekend rewards for compliance with the timeout. And this is what a sample chart looks like. It's partially filled in. We provide this to families when we go through the teach, and we might use it in part of our coaching sessions as well. And here is the timeout chart sequence here. So again, we're going to start with a direct command. Please write your name at the top of the chart. So when we're doing these coaching sessions, we'll start by using commands in terms of creating the chart together, the parent and child. If you don't write your name at the top of the chart, you will have to go to the timeout chair. This is all going to be very familiar to the PCITers out there. You didn't do what I told you to do, so you have to go to the timeout chair. And you're implementing the timeout as you would otherwise. Stay in the chair until I say you can get off, etc., etc. Where it differs here is if they either get up from the chair or refuse to go to the chair, you're going to give that incentive warning. If you don't walk to the chair, you won't earn your sticker. You didn't walk to the chair, so you won't earn your sticker, and then you're going through with a big ignore. So in terms of teaching the family, we're again going to have a second teach session here to go over this new PDI sequence in detail. We're going to go over the rationale for the timeout incentive chart and engage in role plays. In terms of the rationale, what we say is, in order to motivate Will, we are going to give him a reward each day for cooperating with timeout. It might seem weird to you to give him something special for going to timeout, and it kind of sounds like paying him for misbehaving. But what we're actually doing is rewarding him for a very difficult new behavior. And if you think about it, we often reward children for doing chores, but accepting timeout is much harder for Will than doing a simple chore. So for children that have such an oppositional streak, it takes a lot for them to control their tempers, to accept consequences, but it is an extremely important skill for them to learn. So we feel that Will does deserve a reward while he's learning this new skill of cooperating with timeout, just to give you guys a flavor of how we are introducing this to families. So what we're going to encourage them to do is work on the reward menu at home that week between sessions. But similar to standard PCIT, we're not having them use this new procedure until we can coach them in office. So they're going to continue with those 10 minutes of special time and the command training and big ignore, waiting until TIC Coach 1 to do the timeout at home. So when it comes to coaching parents and families in this new procedure, we introduce it to the child, in your individual check-in. So with the child, we might say today you and your parents are going to be using a new approach to help you follow directions better and help them be nicer when they're disciplining you. And you can get little rewards every day and bigger rewards each week. All you have to do to get those rewards is cooperate with how your parents tell you to do timeout. So we're really emphasizing that it is the child's choice to go to timeout, and that they will benefit from those rewards if they do listen. So we'll introduce the timeout to the child. We'll go into CDI coding and then PDI coaching. So I do want to take a quick note here. The Older Child chapter by Cheryl McNeil does recommend to begin coding PDI at this point. However, we decided to make a slight change to match standard PCIT and hold off on PDI coding until parents have had at least one coaching session. So as such, we have been coding CDI only for TIC Coach 1 and then coaching parents in this new PDI sequence. And again, the PDI commands are going to be related to completing and decorating this new, this timeout sticker chart. They might write their last name, color the border, sign your name at the top. These are some sample commands that we can give during this session. And then the child has the opportunity to earn a prize at the end of the session for practicing. Where's my mouse? There you are. Okay, so then the following week, we're gonna have a second coaching session in this timeout with incentive chart sequence. And here, we're gonna be introducing accepting timeout as a coping skill during the child individual check-in. So, or more of a social skill that can be broken down into steps, practiced, and mastered. So you can see here in the right-hand column, these are the 7 steps to accepting timeout. Stop and say to yourself, I need to stay calm, accepting that you did something wrong. Walk to timeout, take 3 deep breaths. Think about how you can make things better by accepting timeout. telling yourself encouraging things like timeout isn't very long, I can do it. And after timeout saying, I'm sorry for not listening. So we're going to introduce this to our kiddo. And we're going to engage in 3 different role plays. First, where the child is using these skills as written with the therapist's support and help. Second, we're going to have the child do the opposite of each step, just for fun. And then finally, we're going to do the 7 steps again with a little less of the therapist's assistance. So Kate and I felt a little bit uneasy about doing the opposite. And we're like, we're working with oppositional kids. Let's try it. Let's see how it works. And in one of the families that I was working with for this session, the client was a 9-year-old girl, and she was pretty disappointed and upset at the beginning of the session because she wanted to use the stencils and was frustrated that we had to do these new skills and these role plays. What ended up being effective for her was reminding her that she can get a prize at the end of the session for engaging in the role plays and practicing these new skills, but also for practicing with dad following the accepting timeout role plays. The second I brought those up, she immediately stood up and was able to engage in all 3 of the role plays and actually did a beautiful job with each one. So with her, those incentives were key. Thinking about each of your clients when you get to this point, what can help benefit them to engage in these role plays. Okay, and then moving right along, after that second coach session, again, some families might need to move slow here. So if you're doing more than 2 sessions in timeout incentive chart, that's perfectly fine. You know your family's best and you know how fast or slow they need to go. But following the chapter, we only have 2 sessions there. So when they're ready to move along, we're going to move to timeout with suspension of privileges. So this is for children who are not overly aggressive. And for children who are doing well with the timeout incentive chart, we're going to move on to this. We'll talk about alternatives for the more aggressive children in a bit. So here, the incentive chart is going to be replaced with suspension of privileges. What this means is all fun activities are going to be put on hold until the child complies with timeout, the original command, and the follow-up command. So here we're going to have 2 minimum coaching sessions. We're going to have TSP Coach 1, where we're going to do CDI and PDI coaching. We're going to introduce the rationale for this approach, both to the family and to the child, and use swoop and go of the toys if the child refuses to sit through timeout in the session. So we don't have a teach here. We're just introducing it to the family and diving in. During the second coach session and beyond, we're going to do CDI and PDI coding just as you would with standard PCIT, incorporate sibling sessions as needed, as well as public behavior. And here is our beautiful TSP sequence. For the sake of time, I'm just going to call attention to the parts that are different from from what I already reviewed. So I'm skipping straight to the warning. If you don't stay on the chair, you will lose your privileges. You got off the chair or you didn't walk to the chair, so you will lose your privileges, is informing them. And then as the child might request their privileges back by the end of the day, you're just going to use that robot voice that Cheryl McNeil spoke about at the conference. I would love for you to have your privileges back. Remember, all you need to do is finish your timeout. Otherwise, the rest of the timeout is the same as you guys know. So really briefly, for those kiddos that are extremely aggressive, extremely defiant, we do want you to tread lightly here. Is PCIT the best fit? Maybe consider alternative parent management approaches. If you are going to continue with PCIT older children for this subset of aggressive kiddos, what we recommend is staying in TIC, timeout incentive chart, with a slight modification. So again, they're going to get stickers and rewards for cooperating with timeout. And when a sticker is lost, there is a time delayed restriction of a single privilege that day. So we're not telling them in that moment when things are already heated, but we're taking away one privilege permanently for the rest of the day. So no computer after dinner, for example. But in order for this to be effective, these privileges have to be controlled by the parent. So for these kiddos, you really want to talk to parents. Do they need a lockbox? Do they need to get certain apps that control all those devices that are attached to Wi-Fi? Really reviewing and problem solving that with the family. Okay, so to wrap up, here is this beautiful PDI staircase. Big shout out to Robin Hahn working with Cheryl McNeil for putting this together for us. And here are our references.
Thanks, Caroline.
So I'm going to throw it over to Kate.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add in before we go to the Q&A. We also have a shout out up here to Tara Matson-Becker from my practice in Florida, who helped us put this PowerPoint together and presented it at the Northeast Regional with us, even though she's not here with us today. And of course to Cheryl McNeil for writing this chapter and guiding us in implementing it. I saw a question in the chat about how does this compare to CASDN, and I think I just really want to drive home that we don't have research on this yet. So that's the next step. We've been talking about trying to get a retrospective analysis with the people around the country and the world who are using this chapter, and we're developing handouts and a manual to try to guide research, but really we need an RCT to know how this compares. You know, I think we, in our heads, hope that the live coaching makes a difference and that this is more robust, but we wouldn't know that without really finding a lovely group of maybe some of you out there to take on an RCT and really look at this in more detail. So thank you for listening. And I know there are a lot of good questions in the chat, and we have Cheryl here as well to guide some discussion.
So Cheryl, pop your video on, and Caroline, if you would close out the share, then we'll just bring up our videos and we'll all stay on for that.
Great.
As Cheryl is coming on, first of all, thanks for a great presentation. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I need to hear it 3 times.
It's hard to do in 40 minutes.
I'm finally getting it, and I'm lucky to have you guys in my office. I have a really creative idea because there were so many fabulous questions. So I'm hoping, Caroline and Kate, that you'll take me up on this idea, which is that we'll do sort of a private, just 3 of us, Q&A with video, and then we'll send folks the answers to their questions, because there are a lot of very, very detailed questions that, frankly, I didn't know the answer to like that. Cheryl and I had a meeting over the weekend last week with all the master trainers, and there's so many important considerations coming up in terms of folks' families being locked at home with social distancing and all that. And it seemed to us a really ripe opportunity to think not only about older child, but what are we doing as we bring PCIT into telehealth when in that first PDI, I can't walk right around the corner here and step in if something's going wrong. So Cheryl, being the thoughtful and sharing person she is, agreed to step in and be discussant and kind of broaden the discussion. So Cheryl, turning it over to you, and we have a good amount of time, which is awesome.
Okay, and I'm sorry to participants whose minds are kind of swirling with this very different approach to PCIT.
You can feel
it does take some time. Right? It does take some time to wrap your head around an idea of a hands-off protocol. So we're trying to do a program with an older child who is too big to take to a timeout chair, too big to keep in a timeout chair, an older child who could hurt the parent during any kind of a physical confrontation. So that's the idea here. And because of that, the program is not as strong as standard PCIT. It can never be as strong as standard PCIT because it allows escape of the original command. But it provides something better than what the caregivers are doing already. So we're kind of moving them in the right direction. I think of the 3 steps of this program as being a movement towards the final discipline program. So if the parent thinks that step 1 is the final discipline program, that would be a problem. They would not want to stay with this protocol because just a use of an ignore for escape is not a good consequence, all right? Because the purpose of escape, the child is trying to escape a demand, and when you turn and ignore, they get to escape the demand. You can't get them to actually do the original command. And in little kid PCIT, we can make sure they do the original command. So step one is only a step to get to a better discipline program, and that's a step to get to a better discipline program. So it's more of a stepwise program to get the parent and the child ready, because it's so much more complicated with an older child who can grab a knife and chase the parent around with a knife, or can break lamps and can run out of the house and into the street and over to a neighbor's house. So with an older child, it is more complicated. And I'm just going to say right off the bat, it is not as effective as if we catch them young, and that's why we want to catch them young. So why would you use this program? I know was one of the questions. And why not use a Barkley program or Caston program? A Barkley program and a Caston program are great options as well. The reason I developed this is because a lot of PCIT therapists don't really know the Caston or the Barkley program very well. They're really comfortable with PCIT and would like to just stretch it up for their 7-year-old or their 7.5-year-old or their 8-year-old, and would just like to stretch it up. And for some cases, we can stretch it up with very little modification. And for some cases, it needs tremendous modification. If you can do straight up PCIT, do straight up PCIT. That's our evidence-based program. That's what works. But there are some children you can't do it with, all right? So they are too mature. They are too large and too dangerous to do a hands-on PCIT program. So the first phase of the program, the use of the big ignore, is mostly for the parent. Now this is an odd idea, okay? It's not so much for the child, it's for the parent. What we're trying to do in the first step is we're trying to get the parent ready to do big time discipline with an older child. And a parent has steps to get ready for this as well. And they have to learn how to say what they mean and mean what they say and follow through. After 8 years of not following through, it's a bit of a change for them to get ready to follow through with a child that they're actually afraid of. So the big ignore is a time when the child can get a tiny little consequence. And the parent is learning to give a warning statement, to stay calm, and to disengage from the coercive process. So do I think this first phase is going to actually get an ECB to within normal limits? I absolutely do not think that. I really think it's just a step along the way to a more effective discipline program. The child does learn a little bit
off
in the
that
first phase. Yes, Kate?
Cheryl, if I could just jump in real quick. I think that when we started implementing your chapter, that's how we were looking at the big ignore, just the way you're talking about. And I think what we ended up finding was that with the good CDI that parents had in place, that the kids actually did adjust their behavior just based on the 45-second ignore to a much greater extent than we expected. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Yes, and that's what I was going to say. If CDI hasn't worked, the big ignore phase is not going to be that great for you. And if you're working with a child on the spectrum who is not that affected by parental social reinforcement, or you're working with a child with callous unemotional traits, you're not going to get very far with phase one. But if CDI was super effective and the child is wanting to please their parent, just like the ignore works in CDI, the ignore works in PDI. And what we'd like to do, let's say that we've got a child who at pretreatment is 15% compliant. It's possible that phase one will get them to 45% compliant because they don't want to lose parental attention and they don't want to displease their parent. And that means that we're now at 45% compliant, and maybe in step 2 we can get them to 62% compliant, and maybe in step 3 we can bring them up to average or above average levels of compliance. But if we try to get them to 85% compliance with one discipline program without phasing it in a little bit at a time, I think that we would have a whole lot of blowouts and a lot of aggression, and that we couldn't handle the extinction burst that we get in the dysregulation. So I think of step one as teaching the parent to learn to stay regulated in discipline. And step one is actually teaching a child to learn to accept little tiny consequences without going ballistic. All right, I'm going to get a mini timeout. I'm going to get a timeout of parental attention, 45-second timeout. Let me see if we can get them to handle that. If we have a child who's not responding well to this, their compliance rate's not improving, the parent is not regulating, you may want to stay with the first phase for a while, the big ignore phase, until you see some mastery of that they're making some progress with this. Step two, then the second phase, the timeout with incentive chart, that really is, it's a sticker chart. So Barkley, Kasdan, they've got their sticker charts, and they're using token economies for older children. What PCIT has is that focus on the relationship, and that really working on some social issues to try to get this socially more under control. And we have the coaching of this rather than handing a chart to a parent and sending them home to give it a try. We're actually going to coach it in session. So there's a couple of advantages there. But the timeout incentive chart really confuses the parents. They're like, oh, you want, and you guys explain this beautifully. You want me to pay my child for having a timeout? No, we want you to reinforce your child for accepting a consequence, which is one of the hardest skills we're ever going to ask these kids to do, which is to accept a consequence. And boy, they're going to be able to do a whole lot better in school and life when they get an F on a test and they accept it, when they lose some recess time and they accept it. So in phase two, we're trying to get the child to accept consequences. And that's happening through this incentive chart. And so we want the parent to learn to be consistent, predictable, follow through, and we're going to give consequences. The easiest way for the child to get a sticker on their chart is by having no timeout at all and listening really well to the parent. But if they do have a timeout, they also can get a sticker on that chart if they accept the timeout, which is a very hard skill, and the parent will be very proud of them for walking to timeout like a little gentleman and sitting in timeout like a little gentleman and taking their consequence like a little gentleman. That is definitely worth a sticker, a lot more worth a sticker than brushing your teeth. Accepting a timeout is a huge behavior. The third phase is in there because I have an aversion to the idea of having a child on a sticker chart for the rest of their lives. So my goal, whenever I put in a reward chart, I want to have an exit plan. I'd like to know, how can I get out of this thing? Because most parents can't handle a chart for a very long period of time without failing in fidelity. So the third phase is designed to not allow escape anymore. And now we're giving a very big consequence, which is suspension of all privileges. So you can't play your iPad, you can't watch TV, you can't go to your friend's house, you can't ride your bike, nothing happens until you accept this timeout, and then you come back and you comply with the original command. If we did not get the child ready in phase one, get the child ready in phase two, woo, phase three would be tough. If you guys want to just jump to phase three, you could have some real serious escalations.
You get a lot of resisting arrest is what you'd get.
You could be calling the police if you want to try to jump to step three without having gotten the child and the parent. The parent has to be ready for phase three. And so they have to learn. Yeah, they have to learn how to be able to give a warning statement and follow it through. They've dropped the ball on this so many times that it's been kind of chaotic. So that's the big picture. But the downfall with waiting, until a child is 9 years old to try to get these behavior problems under control is that a lot of them can't go to suspension of privilege because their aggression is too high. So if you have a child, when you try to take away the privileges and they fight you back, you've got a child who will go and plug the TV back in or take the TV and break it because you suspended the privilege, then you've got a child that can't handle a serious consequence. And that means you've got a child you may end up having to call the police on to manage. And you'll have to keep them on a sticker chart for the rest of their lives. And I hate that. But that's a downfall of the program, is if you can't get to phase 3 and the parent can't pull off the suspension of privilege, then you've got a child on a sticker chart, which I don't love, because the children lose motivation for the sticker chart, so they don't want to earn the rewards, and the parents get to where they're not following through very well on the sticker chart. So I'd love to get to phase 3 if I could. All right, I'll stop there, and if anybody has a question, I'd be happy to answer.
Cheryl, what's different in the folks you're supervising at this point, given the COVID and excessive amount of time that people are having to be together? What are you thinking of as some of the even adaptations of the adaptation at this time? What are you seeing out in the field?
The main thing I'm just seeing during the COVID crisis is I'm seeing extreme amounts of stress in the caregivers and the children. The inability to have your regular routines, the inability to be able to leave your home and to do other things has caused a powder keg. And with PCIT, we are dealing with parents who typically are not this stressed. And so we have higher risk factors and higher safety factors just going forward with standard PCIT or even the older child protocol. There's a lot of safety factors, and I worry about adding extra stress in families' lives when they're already maxed out by giving them a discipline program that requires them to be highly regulated and for problems to get worse before they get better.
And I know one of the things you and I have been talking about, and the training community has been talking about, is that there's a lot in between just keeping folks in CDI forever and moving on to full onslaught, highest intensity of whatever your PDI protocol is. And that I think what you're advocating for is be smart about the shaping and successive approximations that's involved for both the child, but also for the parent. Everybody's having to learn how to tolerate higher levels of distress. For me, as somebody who's been doing telehealth for quite a while, this is the most amazing opportunity because we're getting down and dirty with our families in their homes. So Caroline has a session later with a family at a meal. We cut the session in half on Wednesday, not to do another round of coding and get the 75%, effective with hand me the blue block when they're dealing with mealtime. So this is an incredible opportunity to extend the reach of PCIT and its variants.
It's an incredible opportunity, an incredible challenge, and a responsibility. So one thing about the older child protocol is what I refer to as flattening the curve of the extinction burst. So that when we're in a controlled setting of the clinic, we actually kind of encourage an extinction burst with the child to go to ballistic and have the worst time out of their lives in a controlled setting where we have really sanitized that room and made it as safe as possible. In a home setting, I feel extremely uncomfortable setting a child up for an extinction burst when there are breakable items and when we lose internet and when the earbud falls out of the parent's ear. We don't know what's happening, we're blind. And I feel really uncomfortable with the safety issues and the responsibility of that session. So I feel like we have an opportunity sometimes to ease into PDI where maybe we could do the big ignore for a couple of weeks, get the parent used to being coached, see what our issues are going to be with the child's escalation with receiving a small consequence, see what our compliance rate's going to be, kind of feel the waters a little bit before we go introducing a hands-on timeout procedure with young children in a setting that we have very little control over the environment.
And the reframe for the 200 therapists that are joining us today is not that you're stalling using effective discipline, it's that you're shaping and doing successive approximation teaching of distress tolerance, which is the holy grail. It's what's so neat.
I think the parents will feel better if they feel like they're moving forward, Steve, and they're not stuck in CDI for 6 months.
And that we share the vision of where we're going with this. I'm going to teach you on the green slope so that we can eventually get up to the blue and the black slopes. So Cheryl, you and I have been in touch this week, and literally just yesterday we uploaded next week's webinar, which is introducing, just when you thought Cheryl McNeil was getting lazy, right, and stopped creating new stuff, we got the
Right.
cooperation chart, the quick relief of parents struggling with child behavior during COVID. So if you can join us next Friday at this very same time, where Cheryl's going to be launching dissemination of something she's been working on and had mulling over. So I'm excited about that, and you can start registering for that. Kate and Caroline, there's good news and bad news.
So good.
Bad news is that time is over, but the good news is I get to work with you every day.
Thanks, Steve.
I just want to thank Caroline and Kate. That was an amazing presentation. You explained it so far better than I ever could. I really, really enjoyed hearing.
And we'll look
You
forward to
really broke it down
I've done it without you. It's a lot to
Really?
cover really fast, so I'm sure people's heads are spinning, but yeah, we'll have to
It's
recap.
really good.
I'll make time with you guys to do the visual virtual video Q&A. A couple of last minute questions. Folks are asking, where do we register for the other training? I'm going to put all the information in the follow-up email that you're about to get later today, but you can go to kurtzpsychology.com, the webinar page, and all of our webinars are listed there. And we really, I can't tell you, we so appreciate this community. We support each other, we teach each other, and we're a very good sharing community. So all the tools that you guys were referencing, I know we're going to put together and send as a PDF. So thanks again. I know a bunch of people got 1 o'clock appointments.
Yep.